All right, let's talk about Arya. So, while the Catalan chapters are like very much highlight the role of women in medieval times and their agency and how difficult it is and how it's a different game, while it's more subtle in Catalan, it's very explicit in Arya. Arya is of course, a little girl, so the language is going to be pretty simple, and her thoughts are going to be simple. But it's very clear that Arya is about sexism and her role because she is, as we'll see, she's not one that's born to be a good player in the game, the current game, as a woman. She doesn't have the same tools. Her tool set is for something else, but she's not allowed to use those tools in the world they're in. But well, let's get into it. We'll talk about it as we go. But Arya's stitches were crooked again. This is right off the bat. We're being told Arya is not good at being a traditional woman. Like, that's just straight off. Like, that's what it's saying. The idea is that needlework is woman's work, and Arya can't do woman's work. She just does not fit into this, and we're told this right off the bat. And it's just we're gonna be hit over the head with this. She frowned down at them with dismay and glanced over to where her sister Sansa sat among the other girls. Sansa and Arya are very mirrored characters in so many ways. I don't know if Sansa, if George originally planned on having Sansa be a point of view character or having very much role. In his original outline, Sansa's mentioned, but that outline that was made around 93. But Sansa's mentioned, but Sansa's not a point of view chapter in his original clutch of chapters. She's not very strong in his original outline. She's not mentioned as one of the main characters that's going to make it to the end of the story. She seems to exist to be the opposite of Arya, as somebody who's set up to be very good at playing the game, at being in the game. I say playing the game, like having agency as a woman in this world. When I say agency, I mean like ability to affect change, the ability to have power and work. She's well equipped because Sansa is pretty, and can do all of these womanly things to succeed in this traditional society. Sansa's needlework was exquisite. Everyone said so. Sansa's work is as pretty as she is, Septim Ordain told their lady mother once. Of course, Arya's at least does not think of herself as being good looking. She thinks of herself as ugly, and her stitches are ugly. She has such fine, delicate hands. Again, not Arya. When Catelyn had asked about Arya, the Septa had sniffed. Arya has the hands of a blacksmith. This is going to come back. But yes, she has calloused hands. George R. R. Martin's very focused on hands. This is why, like, when Sir Willem Darry had soft hands, it's a really weird thing, considering he's, at that point we know he's a knight. Later we know that he's master at arms, but here Arya's hands are calloused because she's been doing not so girly things. Arya glanced furtively across the room, worried that Septim Ordain might have read her thoughts, but Septa was paying her no attention today. She was sitting with the Princess Myrcella, all smiles and admiration. So it's interesting that Sansa and Arya have a Septa to teach them about the Faith of the Seven, but there doesn't seem to be a character to teach the sons about the Faith of the Seven, which is an interesting dichotomy. I'm not sure why that was ever set up. One would think that Catelyn would be very interested in her sons, taking on the faith that she believed in. It's not often that the Septa was privileged to instruct a royal princess in the womanly arts. Here we're told right off the bat, these are womanly arts. As she had said when the queen brought Myrcella to join them, Arya thought that Myrcella's stitches looked a little crooked too, but you would never know it from the way Septim Ordain was cooing. Well, of course, Septim Ordain has to coo because it's the princess, She studied her own work again, looking for some way to salvage it, then sighed and put down the needle. She looked glumly at her sister. Sansa was chatting away happily as she worked. Beth Cassell, Sir Roderick's little girl, was sitting by her feet, listening to every word she said, and Jane Poole was leaning over to whisper something in her ear. Now, this all seems like jealousy of Sansa, but it's jealousy of the traditional woman. Sansa is this beautiful girl who can do needlework and is going to do great as a woman in this world. Arya is upset about this. So, she has friends. Arya doesn't seem to have any friends. So, what are you talking about? Arya asked suddenly. And that's the other thing is women are supposed to have better social graces, and Arya has no social graces. Jane gave her a startled look, then giggled. Sansa looked abashed. Beth blushed. No one answered. "Tell me," Arya said. Jane glanced over to make certain that Septim Ordain was not listening. Myrcella said something, and then the Septa laughed along with the rest of the ladies. "We were talking about the prince," Sansa said, her voice soft as a kiss. Arya knew which prince he meant. Joffrey, of course, the tall, handsome one. Sansa got to sit with him at the feast. Arya had to sit with the little fat one, naturally. Of course, they were, set up that way because, they want Sansa and Joffrey to get married, and Arya is closer to age to Tommen. But it's interesting in this little line that even though Arya grows to hate Joffrey, there's this little hint that she wished she had the handsome one, the handsome boy. "Joffrey likes your sister," Jane whispered, proud as if she had something to do with it. She was the daughter of Winterfell's steward and Sansa's dearest friend. And of course, Jane Poole comes back later as, the Arya imposter. But who knows if George R.R. Martin had that idea in her head. And of course, Beth Cassell is later who Arya takes a name for when she becomes Blind Beth. He told her she was very beautiful. "He's going to marry her," little Beth said dreamily, hugging herself. "Then Sansa will be queen of all the realm." Sansa had the grace to blush. She blushed prettily. She did everything prettily, Arya thought, with dull resentment. "Beth, you shouldn't make up stories," Sansa corrected the younger girl, gently stroking her hair to take the harshness of her words. She looked at Arya. "What did you think of Prince Joff's sister? He's very gallant, don't you think?" Now, there's an interesting little thing here, is that Beth Cassell actually knows the truth, and which means her father being the steward probably heard the truth as well from Ned, and so it's interesting that this information has been leaked to Beth, or Beth overheard something, and she's actually saying it here, but they actually don't believe it. She says, "Oh, you shouldn't make up stories." Well, Beth is not actually making up stories. She heard it from Vay and Poole. "He's very gallant, don't you think?" "John says he looks like a girl," Arya said. Sansa sighed as she stitched. "Poor John. He gets jealous because he's a bastard." That is true of this. "He's our brother," Arya said, much too loudly. Her voice cut through the afternoon quiet of the tower room. Septim Ordain, again, this idea of bastards being these lesser things is a big deal. This comes back for Sansa later on when she has to pose as being a bastard. Septim Ordain raised her eyes. She had a bony face, sharp eyes, and thin, lipless mouth made for frowning. She was frowning now. There's a lot more repetition of words with Arya, simpler vocabulary. "What are you talking about, children?" Our half-brother, Sansa corrected, soft and precise. She smiled for the Septa. "Arya and I were remarking on how pleased we were to have the princess with us today," she said. Septim Ordain nodded. Indeed, a great honor for us all. That was, you know, Sansa being clever there. She didn't want the Septim Ordained to know that they were sitting there talking about boys, so she quickly comes in and says that they were talking about the princess. A great honor for us all. Princess Myrcella smiled uncertainly at the compliment. Myrcella's a little kid. She doesn't understand this like weird cooing over her. Arya, why aren't you at work? The Septa asked. She rose to her feet. Starched skirts rustling as she started across the room. Let me see your stitches. Arya wanted to scream. It was just like Sansa to go and attract the Septa's attention. Here, she said, surrendering her work. Sansa did not do that, but Arya is like placing some blame on her, you know. Or at least she didn't want to attract attention. She didn't, you know, she was talking about bastards, and Septim Ordained heard that, and then Sansa was like, "Oh crap! We weren't talking about bastards. We're talking about Myrcella." Now there's a little. I don't know if this is intentional, but of course Myrcella is secretly a bastard. And so they're talking about bastards, and she's like, what are you guys talking about? And she says, oh, what an honor it is for Myrcella to be with us. Which is, I don't know if that's intentional, but it's kind of funny that her lie is, that's what they were talking about bastards, so in a way, you know, they're talking about Myrcella, but not, you know. Septo examined the fabric. Arya, this will not do. This will not do at all. Everyone was looking at her. It was too much. Sansa was too well-bred to smile at her sister's disgrace. But Jane was smirking on her behalf. Even Princess Myrcella looked sorry for her. Arya felt tears filling her eyes. She blushed herself out of her chair and bolted for the door. Septim Ordained called after her. Arya, come back here. Don't you take another step. Your lady mother will hear of this, in front of the royal princess, too. You'll shame us all. She's leaving the room without saying, Your Grace. Septa stopped at the door and turned back, biting her lips. The tears were running down her cheeks now. She managed a stiff little bow to Myrcella. By your leave, my lady. Now, I don't know if George, figured it out here, or if later he makes a big deal of this. I'm talking about this my lady line. Arya's a little kid, so she doesn't know that you're supposed to say my princess. George makes a big deal about this in the later prologue of A Clash of Kings, about the proper, you properly address somebody as my princess, not my lady. But of course, Arya's a little girl. But then again, in the Daenerys chapter, we also hear about Willem Darry calling a princess my lady. And later on, I think Darkstar accidentally calls Arianne my lady once. And so it's one of those situations where you're like, okay, is this George screwing up because he hadn't put that lore in? Or is it Arya screwing up because she's a little girl, or what, it's hard to say. Myrcella blinked at her and looked at her ladies for guidance. But if she was uncertain, Septim Ordained was not. Just where do you think you're going, Arya? The Septa demanded. Again, Myrcella doesn't understand any of this because she's a little girl. Arya glared at her. I have to go shoe a horse, she said sweetly. I have to go shoe a horse, she said sweetly, taking a brief satisfaction in the shock on her Septa's face. She then whirled around and made her exit, running down the steps as fast as her feet would take her. I guess this is referring back to the fact that she has hands like a blacksmith, that she has to go shoe a horse. The only thing I could think of also is that maybe, this is a euphemism for I need to go to the bathroom, but this never comes up again as a euphemism for I need to go to the bathroom. So I guess it must be like she's thinking about the blacksmith hand comment, and so she has to go shoe a horse, and that would shock her. That would shock the Septa. It wasn't fair. Sansa had everything. Sansa was 2 years older. Maybe by the time Arya had been born, there had been nothing left, as if she was given these gifts. Often it felt that way. Sansa could sew and dance and sing. She wrote poetry. She knew how to dress. She played the high harp and the bells. We're talking about all the things that, ladies can do to advance their place. Worse, she was beautiful. Sansa had gotten their mother's high cheekbones and thin and thick auburn hair of the Tullys. Arya took after their lord father. Her hair was a lusterless brown, and her face was long and solemn. The Starks are talked about having horse faces, long faces, and people make a lot of this like George R.R. Martin genetics that you either take after one parent or the other, and obviously this George R.R. Martin genetics plays a big part in, like, obviously the murder mystery. I mean, the not the murder mystery, the paternity mystery later, where Ned is sleuthing around trying to figure out if Cersei had an affair. And so the fact that he's establishing in this world that these characters, either look like their mother, look like their father, it's, or at least one of them would, and you've got this pack of Starks, one of them would look like Ned, Arya's the one. And so it's, or maybe it's a statement that she's more Stark than the rest or something, but I don't know. But it's weird because it's obviously not how genetics works in real life. Genetics is more complicated, and but George doesn't stick to it completely. There's lots of examples of everything not being that simple. Like Sansa has a lighter head than her mother and things like that. So Jane used to call her Arya Horseface and neigh whenever she came near. It hurt that the one thing Arya could do better than her sister was ride a horse. Well, that and manage a household. Sansa never had much of a head for figures. So this idea that Arya is smart and Arya is talented with riding a horse, and later we find out weapons, all these things that can help a man, but this idea is that, these things that help women wouldn't be those things. If she did marry Prince Joff, Arya hoped for his sake that he had a good steward. Now later we find out that Arya is not that stupid. So Sansa is actually not very mean to her. When you start looking at the things that she's accusing of Sansa of, they're mainly things of her friends. Like Jane Poole is the one that called her Arya Horseface. She puts things in Sansa's mouth. Sansa is actually not that mean to her. Nymeria was waiting for her in the guard room at the base of the stairs. Now, of course, Nymeria, originally Nymeria is named after the Rhoynish queen. Originally, her name was the name was Numerian, and it was a Valyrian queen, but no, or maybe powerful witch or something. It doesn't really matter. Obviously, we're in this situation where Arya and Sansa are paralleled. Their direwolf is Nymeria, this strong female feminist queen. Arya is this gender bending character. Sansa is the traditional one, traditional lady, and she names her direwolf Lady. It's very clear the parallels, and of course Lady is killed, which is another statement about what this means. Traditional female roles are, die, and then what happens to the story? What happens to society? What happens to the story? She bound to her feet as soon as she caught the sight of Arya. Arya grinned. The wolf pup loved her, even if no one else did. They went everywhere together, and Nymeria slept in her room at the foot of her bed. If Mother had not forbid it, Arya would gladly have taken the wolf with her to needlework. Let Septim Dane complain about her stitches then. Kind of a little thing of violence there. Nymeria nipped eagerly at her hand, and as Arya untied her. She had yellow eyes, and they caught the sunlight. They gleamed like 2 golden coins. Arya had named her after the warrior queen of the Rhoyne, who had led her people across the narrow sea. And again, originally Valyrian, but it doesn't matter. She's got this feminist queen, this strong female queen, who's going to be her role model. That had been a great scandal too. So this is the whole thing about what society she lives in. Nothing was bad with, with Lady. Um, Sansa, of course, had named her pup Lady. Arya made a face and hugged the wolfling tight. Nymeria licked her ear and she giggled. So this isn't even like very subtle. George R. R. Martin is straight up telling us exactly why the direwolves are named the way they are and what that means, and we're setting up the the gender role parallel. The story is thick with it. By now, Septim Ordain would certainly have sent word to her lady mother. If she went to her room, they would find her. Arya did not care to be found. She had a better notion. The boys were at practice in the yard. She wanted to see Robb put gallant Prince Joffrey flat on his back. "Come," she whispered to Nymeria. They got up and ran. She got up and ran, the wolf coming hard at her heels. There was a window in the covered bridge between the armory and the great keep, where you had a view of the whole yard. That was where they headed. They arrived flushed and breathless, to find Jon seated on the sill, one leg drawn up languidly to his chin. He was watching the action, so absorbed that he seemed unaware of her approach until the White Wolf moved to meet him. Again, this is like Jon the Observer. He has a different personality, remember? He's Jon the Observer, and he notices things, Something that's dropped later on, but this is early Jon characteristic that he's hitting home. Nymeria stalked closer on wary feet. Ghost, already larger than his litter mates, smelled her. So Ghost, just like Jon, is larger. Gave her an ear and a careful nip, and then settled back down. Jon gave a curious look. "Shouldn't you be working on your stitches, little sister?" Arya made a face at him. "I wanted to see them fight." He smiled. Of course, she's kind of lying there. Come here, then. Arya climbed up on the window and sat beside him, to a chorus of thuds and grunts from the yard below. And, of course, in the original plan, Jon and Arya are going to have a romance. So, there's a closeness here, but that George wanted to develop into something else, but that seems to be abandoned, and now it's just a close sibling love. To her disappointment, it was the younger boys drilling. Bran was so heavily padded he looked as though he had belted on a featherbed, and Prince Tommen, who was plump to begin with, seemed positively round. They were huffing and puffing and hitting each other with padded wood swords under the watchful eye of old Sir Roderick, the master of arms, a great stout keg of a man with magnificent white cheek whiskers. A dozen spectators, man and boy, were called out encouragement. By the way, it's like we have Beth Cassell and then we have Roderick Cassell. Like, he hasn't actually created enough. He did have a few characters. Like, he has Hullen and Harwin and stuff like that, and Van Poole. But it's remarkable coincidence that she goes out and finds Beth's dad, because he hasn't established enough characters yet. A dozen spectators, man and boy, were calling out encouragement, Robb's voice the loudest among them. She spotted Theon Greyjoy beside him, his black doublet emblazed with the golden kraken of his house, a look of wry contempt on his face. Both of the combatants were staggering. Arya judged that they had been at it for a while. "A shade more exhausting than needlework," Jon observed. "A shade more fun than needlework," Arya gave back at him. Jon grinned, reached over, and messed up her hair. Arya flushed. They had always been close. Jon had their father's face, as she did. They were the only ones. Robb and Sansa and Bran and even little Rickon all took after the Tullys with easy smiles and fire in their hair. Again, we're talking about the establishing the genetics thing here, because this is going to be the big issue later. And when Arya had been little, she had been afraid that meant she was a bastard too. It had been Jon she had gone to in fear, and Jon who had reassured her. But of course, this barrier that they're both siblings here, but they can't have the romance. But if they find out later they're only cousins, Why aren't you down in the yard? Arya asked him. He gave her a half smile. Bastards are not allowed to damage young princes, he said. Any bruises they take in the practice yard must come from trueborn swords. Oh, Arya felt abashed. She should have realized. For the second time today, Arya reflected that life was not fair. Of course, this comes back later when we start talking about like Micah and things like that, like who is allowed to duel Joffrey and Tommen. She watched her little brother whack at Tommen. I could do just as good as Bran, she said. He's only 7. I'm 9. Jon looked at her over with his 14-year-old wisdom. You're too skinny, he said. He took her arm to feel her muscle. Then he sighed and shook his head. I doubt you could even lift a long sword, little sister. Never mind swing one. Arya snatched back her arm and glared at him. Jon messed up her hair again. They watched Bran and Tommen circle each other. You see Prince Joffrey? Jon asked. She hadn't, not at first glance, but when she looked again, she found him. She found him to the back, under the shade of the high stone wall. He was surrounded by men she did not recognize, young squires in the livery of Lannister and Baratheon, strangers all. There were a few older men among them, knights, she surmised. Look at the arms of his surcoat, Jon suggested. This is, again, Jon being observant. Arya looked. An ornate shield had been embroidered on the prince's padded surcoat. No doubt the needlework was exquisite. The arms were divided down the middle. On one side was the royal crowned stag of the royal house. The other was the Lion of Lannister. The Lannisters are proud, Jon observed. You'd think the royal sigil would be sufficient. But no, he makes his mother's house equal in honor of the king's. Jon being the observant one, but yes, this is representative of the Lannister-Baratheon relationship. It's not just that Baratheon is king. The Lannisters feel that they're kind of co-kings. But Arya's like, the woman is important too. Jon chuckled. Perhaps you should do the same, little sister. Wed Tully to Stark in your arms. A wolf with a fish in its mouth? It made her laugh. That would look silly. Besides, if a girl can't fight, why should she have a coat of arms? Some foreshadowing, because she is, of course, becoming a fighter. Jon shrugged. Girls get the arms, but not the swords. Bastards get the swords, but not the arms. I did not make the rules, little sister. There was a shout from the courtyard below. Sir Tommen was rolling in the dust, trying to get up and failing. All of the padding made him look like a turtle on its back. Bran was standing over him with upraised wooden sword, ready to whack him again once he regained his feet. The men began to laugh. This is a bit of foreshadowing of Sam. It's Jon and Sam at the wall. Because later this happens to Sam as well. Okay, so enough, Sir Roderick called out. He gave the prince a hand and yanked him back to his feet. Well fought. Lew, Donis, help them out of their armor. This is to contrast a good armorer with a bad one like Alistair Thorne. He looked around. Prince Joffrey, Robb, will you go another round? Robb, already sweaty from the previous bout, moved forward eagerly. Gladly. Joffrey moved into the sunlight in response to Roderick's summons. His hair shone like spun gold. He looked bored. This is a game for children, Sir Roderick. Theon gave a sudden bark of laughter. You are children, he said derisively. Pretty bold of Theon Greyjoy, considering like how everyone was treating Myrcella, right? Theon sits here and calls the heir to Winterfell and the heir to the Iron Throne children derisively. I mean, very bold of Theon. Robb may be a child, Joffrey said. I am a prince, and I grow tired of swatting at Starks with a play sword. You've got more swats than you gave. Joff, Robb said. Are you afraid? Prince Joffrey looked at him. Oh, terrified, he said. You're so much older. Some of the Lannister men laughed. Jon looked at the scene with a frown. Joffrey is truly a little shit, he told Arya. Sir Roderick tugged thoughtfully at his white whiskers. What are you suggesting? He asked the prince. Live steel. Done, Robb shot back. You'll be sorry. Now, this scene. So there's a lot of these references of like duels beginning large wars, and keep in mind that like Game of Thrones, it's based on the historical War of the Roses, and between the Yorks and the Lancasters. Instead of the Starks and the Lannisters, it's the Yorks. It was the Yorks and the Lancasters, and we call it the War of the Roses because there is a. They certainly didn't call it that at the time. It was fairly late, like 19th century. Maybe this term War of the Roses came about, and it's based on a Shakespeare play, King Henry VI, Part 1. And in that story, there's a disagreement between two characters, and they threaten to duel, but then over an issue, and then there's this idea that the people that support one side pluck red roses, and the people that support the other side pluck white roses, and thus we now refer to it as the War of the Roses, based on the Shakespeare play. But you have this idea that a duel, that a personal vendetta between two people can grow into larger wars that kill, thousands, and so here. It's the same kind of thing here, where we have like clearly a duel, a personal situation could all of a sudden become a war, right? And because that if Robb Stark and Joffrey Lannister and Joffrey Baratheon were given live steel here, that somebody's ending up cut, and it is gonna be a big deal. And of course this comes back with the duel that Joffrey wants to fight with Micah, and how it's boiling over. It's going to become a huge war, and so the duel is this like this metaphor of that, like these personal relationships boiling over into actual wars. But George, he keeps playing with us, right? Like the duel is set just like Henry VI, Part 1, but then he kind of goes, no, like the Master at Arms is like, I don't think so. Or in the other situation at Derry, they deal with it as well by saying, oh well, we'll just kill Sansa's direwolf and stuff like that. Or in Oberyn Martell with his duel against Ironwood, they deal with it. These duels don't boil over because you have cooler minds like figuring things out. But the idea is that like all you need is a few hotheads, and these personal vendettas can become actual wars. And so this is all referencing like the actual War of the Rose genesis, name genesis, and that scene in Henry VI. So the Master at Arms put a hand on Robb's shoulder to quiet him. Live steel is too dangerous. I will permit tourney swords with blunted edges. Joffrey said nothing, but a man strange to Arya, a tall knight with black hair and burned scars on his face, pushed forward in front of the prince. This is your prince. Who are you to tell him he may not have an edge on his sword, sir? It's funny that Joffrey says nothing because he's just kind of he knows that the Hound is going to come in and do that, like argue on his behalf. Let's see here. The Master at Arms of Winterfell, Clegane, and you would do so well not to forget it. Are you training women here? The burned man wanted to know. He was muscled like a bull. I'm training knights, Sir Roderick said pointedly. They will have steel when they are ready, when they are of an age. The burned man looked at Robb. How old are you, boy? 14, Robb said. I killed a man at 12. You can be sure it was not with a blunt sword. So this chapter is very direct, like very directly. I mean, it's just so much about gender, right? So Arya starts in this world of women, and she hates this world because she's not good at it, but she's also disliking the toxic femininity that's going on there, which when you think toxic femininity, it's the stereotypes is that women are catty and can shame other women into conforming. That's one of the stereotypes, that they're gossipy, that they're and that they shame each other into behavior. This is like the famed, like, what a sorority house is like, So, but then she goes from the toxic feminine environment to now the toxic masculine environment. And what's the toxic masculine environment? It's about being butch and macho. And so here in the butch, environment, they're like, oh, let's be obsessed with death and danger. And here, I want to use live steel. When did you kill a man? And so Clegane is talking about killing a man at 12. I think he was 12 during Robert's Rebellion, and I know he took part in the sack of King's Landing. So he's talking about slaughtering an innocent person. Like an innocent person in the streets during the sack of King's Landing, is probably what happened here. But of course, like, Sandor's whole story is about toxic masculinity and like him being pushed into this world. His face was put into a fire by his older brother because he was playing with a toy, and he wanted to toughen him up. And this is the whole thing: is again this process with Bran watching the execution. Like, we need to toughen these boys up. We need to kill the boys and make them men, And this is what, and and the Hound has the ugly face on it. He's being very blunt about it. But keep in mind that Sir Roderick is just the gentle face on the same thing. Sir Roderick is trying to make them into good fighters, to make these men. He's taking 7-year-olds. I mean, let's step back. Like, these 7-year-olds are beating each other. In fact, is Tommen's is he 6? Yeah, I think Tommen is 6 at the time of this. Because I think later they might say that he's a year younger than Bran, but he's I'm double checking this. I'm so sorry, but the maybe he's 7. I don't know. He's 6. He's close. He's close. He's late 6, maybe early 7. But nonetheless, he's having these little boys beat each other with swords. Okay. There's nothing. Well, what Sir Roderick is doing is not freaking great. And then he's taking 14-year-olds and having them, a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, and having them sword fight. And one of them's like, and then they're talking about live steel and stuff like this, training them to be killers and whatever. Now, and so the Hound, as ugly as the Hound is, he's just not like putting any. He's not dressing it up. He's like, well, what are we talking about? If we're talking, I mean, so Roderick is training them to be killers, right? This is what it's all about. And so, the Hound is just like, well, what are you talking about? Like, you're old enough to go to war, as he was at 12. Then you should be old, you should be training to be a man, And so it's So, but whatever you think of all of this, I'm just saying that it's very much our author's intent that he's talking about gender roles, and he's talking about Arya and how she's more interested in this world, but both worlds are not freaking great, right? Obviously, the man's world seems to have more problems, but um, Sandor Clegane is an embodiment of toxic masculinity and everything that happened to him and his sad state. And so he's just giving a voice to it here. And that's the thing is he says, Arya could see Robb bristle. His pride was wounded. He turned on Roderick. Let me do it. I can beat him. Beat him with a tourney blade, then, Sir Roderick said. Joffrey shrugged. Come and see me when you're older, Stark. If you're not too old. There was laughter from the Lannister men. Robb's curses rang through the yard. Arya covered her mouth in shock. Theon Greyjoy seized Robb's arm to keep him away from the prince. Sir Roderick tugged at his whiskers in dismay. Joffrey feigned a yawn and turned to his younger brother. Come, Tommen. The hour of play is done. Leave the children to their frolics. That brought more laughter from the Lannisters, more curses from Robb. Sir Roderick's face was beet red in fury under the white of his whiskers. Theon kept Robb locked locked in an iron grip until the princes and their party were safely away. I mean, it's interesting that Theon says, he's smart enough. He calls them children earlier, and then he's smart enough to like keep Robb from going after him. Jon watched them leave, and Arya watched Jon. His face had grown as still as the pool at the heart of the godswood. Finally, he climbed down from off the window. The show is done, he said. He bent to scratch Ghost behind the ear. The white wolf rose and rubbed against him. You had best run back to your room, little sister. Septim Ordain will surely be lurking. The longer you hide, the sterner the penance. You'll be sowing all through winter. When the spring thaw comes, they will find your body with a needle still locked tight between your frozen fingers. Arya did not think it was funny. I hate needlework, she said with a passion. It's not fair. Now, this needlework obviously is going to come back with needle. But, nothing is fair, Jon said. Of course, he's talking about his own bastardy here. He messed up her hair and walked away from her. Ghost moving silently between them. It's not fair is also his bastardy, so he's also talking about gender, Nymeria started to follow too and then stopped and came back when he saw Arya was not coming. Reluctantly, she turned in the other direction. It was worse than Jon had thought. It wasn't Septim Ordain waiting in her room. It was Septim Ordain and her mother. And so, she's gonna get a stern talking to from her mom for not being ladylike. But it's funny. Well, also, what's kind of funny about this ending is you kind of think about the discipline situation, like what Robb and Joffrey were doing, their fight and their situation, and how everyone was behaving there is much worse. It's a much worse situation than Arya, a little girl, being upset that she can't do stitches and storming out of a room. These boys were threatening to essentially kill each other, but in this situation, that it's going to be, well, boys will be boys, and how these two worlds are raised, anyway. Whenever I talk about like gender in Ice and Fire, people are like, "Oh, why do you have to make things so like political or whatever?" And I'm like, "No, like George is beating us over the head with this stuff, and Arya 1 is really beating us over the head with it." We have the two types of ladies, Sansa and Arya, explicitly laid out with Nymeria and Lady. And all of the things that Sansa has that allow her to do well in the world of women, and what Arya is lacking. And then she runs from the women's world to the men's world, where we're then exposed to like what the men are supposed to be doing, which is fighting and killing. And they have this discussion of like danger and death and killing, and that's how to be a man, and how like the men's world is all about discarding the boy as a concept, killing the boy. And that these are the two worlds presented in this narrative. And so, interesting stuff. I quite like this chapter, actually. It's quite good. I mean, even if it's a little blunt and it's a little direct, but I still think it's a really fun chapter. It's a great introduction to Arya and Sansa. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks a bunch.